As far as Quebec is concerned, we don't have a carbon tax. And the impact on the price increases, according to 165 economists across Canada, well, and I don't want to in any way minimize what the residents of Saskatchewan are feeling and experiencing when I say this, but in Quebec, it is the carbon market alongside California, which is the wealthiest state of the United States. In Quebec, the carbon market has put back in the coffers $1.5 billion. The Canadian provinces had the opportunity to join Quebec in that carbon exchange that was not only good for the government coffers, but also for businesses, companies and corporations, because it stimulated innovation in those companies. At the end of the day, why did Saskatchewan make a different choice? And if Saskatchewan wants to get rid of the carbon tax, well, what steps will Saskatchewan take in order to reduce the impacts of climate change and to drive down greenhouse gas emissions? You'll recall that the carbon tax is a similar measure to one that was put in place in the past to diminish or reduce oxidous sulfur emissions. And we have 65% fewer emissions of oxidous sulfur. And we'd like that to happen Canada-wide, and in Quebec in particular, thanks to a carbon marketplace. So why didn't you follow suit, i.e. the carbon market or the carbon exchange, which is kind of lucrative in both the middle and short term?
Great, we're out of time. If you could offer as short as answer as you can, please.
This really speaks to the diversity in our nation. What works in one area of the nation may not work ideally in another area of the nation. And I think this is a reason why if you don't have a federal government that isn't working collaboratively with all subnational governments across the nation, you are destined to fail in your policy development. With respect to the carbon tax specifically, we've always said that it's a harmful tax from day one. And we've always also said outside of Quebec, it's been reasonably fairly imposed, as harmful as it is across the nation. What we've seen more recently with the decisions on that impact heating fuel in Atlantic Canada is that, again, outside of Quebec, and now this tax isn't being applied fairly across the nation or imposed fairly across the nation in any way. And that's why we made the decisions that we did when it comes to home heating fuel, for giving the rebating the carbon tax on natural gas and electricity.
Sorry, we're past our time. Mr. Boulerice, welcome to Ogo. You have 6 minutes, sir.
Merci beaucoup. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson, and thank you to our guest. I'm very glad to have an opportunity to speak with the Premier of Saskatchewan today, even though I still don't really understand how it turned out that he's appearing before this committee when we're supposed to be turning our attention to other issues, i.e. the estimates. But given that he is here, I'll take this opportunity. Premier Moe, you'll agree with me that climate change is having increasing impacts on communities, many of your communities in Saskatchewan that over the recent years have experienced substantial forest fires. There's an increasing number over time. It has an impact on public health and on the evacuees that have had to leave their homes. In 2023, your province had thousands of forest fires, which is far above the 150 average. And the surface area that was affected was 10 times bigger than what would normally occur. And the skies were smoke-filled for days on end, and folks had difficulty breathing. Now, Canada is a laggard on the world stage when it comes to our greenhouse gas emissions. Canada did sign the Paris Accord, and I imagine you are aware of the objectives under the Paris Accord. Now, how is it that we shouldn't make the big polluters pay, those that have a real bearing on our climate change? What's your game plan to deal with those big emitters, please?
Well, I would first of all say the average forest fires in Saskatchewan is 300, not 100 or 150. And we had 450 last year, and we experienced some rain that helped us out immensely. Alberta and northwestern British Columbia had a much more challenging year. Yes, climate change does impact weather, of which we're experiencing, I think, in fairness, all across the nation and around the world are experiencing to some degree. The Paris Accord, I'm very familiar with the Paris Accord, and in that accord, there are a number of opportunities, I think, for us to provide a platform. Let me back up. I don't agree that Canada is a climate laggard, and I certainly don't agree that Saskatchewan is a climate laggard. I think Saskatchewan and Canada are leaders when it comes to developing industries that are reducing emissions with innovation, and then sharing those around the world. And again, I said through the Paris Accord, there was Article 6, the internationally traded mitigation outcomes option, of which I would hope that this, and I would encourage this federal government to act on and to work collaboratively. For example, with the Saskatchewan agriculture industry, we're selling air drills all around the world. We'd love to be able to recapture some of those carbon credits back to our Canada and back to our nation and to our province, and ultimately to our agricultural industry and our innovators in that industry that are building some of the latest and greatest technology that are sequestering carbon in our soils, ultimately making Saskatchewan agriculture one of the most sustainable producers of food in the world, and marginally very, very close to being net zero today when you compile that with precision agriculture, when you compile that with the Tier 4 engines that Saskatchewan agriculture producers are paying for and utilizing in every piece of equipment they have. So Canada is not a climate laggard. Canada is an innovation leader when it comes to providing innovation to reduce emissions, whether it be from Saskatchewan's perspective, the ag industry, the potash industry, the uranium industry for clean nuclear power, or the oil industry. And so I think we need to look at this.
Premier, I'm sorry. I know that you like to speak. I know you like talking, Premier, but you haven't answered my question. Now, if you look at the figures, Premier, Canada is the second biggest greenhouse gas emitter. It's not me saying this. This is a UN report that has stated this. In 2016 and 2020, on average, we emitted 16 tonnes per inhabitant of greenhouse gas emissions. That's 4 times bigger than the global average. And we are a far cry from meeting the UN's climate objectives. How are you going to make the big polluters pay for what they are responsible for in terms of climate change? You circumvented the question, you waved your magic wand, and you think that with giant vacuum cleaners, you're going to be able to sequester greenhouse gas emissions. But what about the people you represent? How are you going to protect them from climate change?
With all due respect, you're bouncing back between gross numbers of carbon emitted and then a per capita measurement, and you're not able to do that with any credibility with the question. The goal is not for is for the big climate polluters to pay. The goal is for them to reduce their emissions because they are employing people in your community and my community, with all due respect. Per capita emissions is the wrong metric to use, and I would encourage everyone at this committee and across government to not be using that metric. If you want to use that metric, Saskatchewan is the largest per capita exporter in Canada and one of the largest per capita exporters in the world. And so what we are producing, yes, it is emitting global emissions, but we are providing that food, fuel, and fertilizer, the cleanest food and fuel and fertilizer, to over 150 countries around the world, and we are displacing, in the case of potash fertilizer, for example, it's 50% lower in its carbon emissions per ton produced. We are displacing fertilizer that is being produced by Russia and Belarus today by making more Saskatchewan fertilizer available. Credit to the federal government that invested in the latest fertilizer, the latest potash mine that is being developed here, a $20 billion investment by a global company. And so the goal is not for our employers to pay more. The goal is for them to emit less and to displace higher emitting, like competing industries around the world. That is how we build a strong Canadian economy. That is how we lower global emissions. And that's how we employ Canadians in your community and mine.
Thanks. That is our time. We're now on to the 5 minutes rounds. Mr. Lawrence, please.
Thank you. And thank you, Premier, for coming here. And as a member of the Finance Committee, let me express my extreme disappointment with the chair unwilling to hear the representatives of over 1 million Canadians in the great province of Saskatchewan. I want to focus relatively narrowly, and that's with respect to the inflationary impact of the carbon tax. Tiff Macklin in Finance Committee made it quite clear that actually 0.6% of inflation, which equates to around 20 to 30% of inflation, given the rate on a day, is the responsibility of the carbon tax, and that the increase will be responsible for another 0.15%, meaning that over 30% of inflation is a direct result of the carbon tax. Now, we've been unable to validate this until you took the actions that you did, Premier Moe. And I'm wondering, have you seen an impact and a reduction in inflation by Saskatchewan's actions with respect to the non-collection of the carbon tax on home heating?
The Statistics Canada, in their first report, it said, and I quote, "In Saskatchewan, the collection of the carbon levy ceased in January 2024, contributing to the province's year-over-year price decline of natural gas." We're seeing it in Manitoba as well, where the province of Manitoba has foregone their fuel tax on the fuel that they sell each and every day. What you're seeing is the CPI is lowering in Manitoba as well. And so my question to this committee would be, if we were to lower, not increase, but to lower or eliminate what will be 17 cents per liter of fuel charged to all Canadians coming this Monday when they fuel their vehicle up to take their children to soccer, to hockey, or to whatever sport or school that they might be going to. What do you think that would do to our consumer price index across the nation? We'd likely achieve our 2%. We're at 2.7% now. And I think that would be positive, and it would give the Bank of Canada the opportunity, hopefully, to start to lower the interest rate, start to solidify that certainty for investment, both foreign and domestic, into Canadian communities and Canadian industries, which, again, I would allude to are the most sustainable in the world. The Saskatchewan story around the most sustainable food and fuel and fertilizer that we produce and provide to the world is Ontario has a parallel story. Quebec has a parallel story. This is a story that we told when we went to COP28 in Dubai. And this is a story that we would encourage each of you as federal members representing Canadians, all of us collectively representing all Canadians, to share at every opportunity. We are not climate laggards in this nation. We most certainly are innovators and leaders when it comes to addressing the challenges that we might face globally.
Thank you, Premier Moe. So just to summarize, and I'll pass over to my colleague, is that in the Bank of Canada, Tiff Macklin, the governor of the Bank of Canada, said that we would see a reduction in inflation. And we've actually seen that in the province of Saskatchewan, as the rate nationally is 2.7, and the current rate in Saskatchewan is 1.7%. So we've had this validated, which, as you said, if the lower inflation means the lower interest rates go, which means we have more investments, which can enhance our productivity, which can make all Canadians more prosperous. I am just shocked that Liberals want to keep Canadians poor. Thank you.
The opportunity we have is to remove the consumer carbon tax on all things for everyone. That would reduce the inflationary effects that we're feeling when we fuel our vehicle up 17 cents a liter there. That same 17 cents a liter is being paid for the truck that is bringing that vehicle to our grocery store. And so, and the fellows that are producing it. And we see that in Saskatchewan as well, not with their direct fuel, but with some of the other fuel sources that they're using in transporting that food. So it is a challenge. And I think, as you can tell, I feel there is a much better way for us to work collaboratively, whether that be across party lines or across, subnational jurisdictions in the nation, if that may be, to really provide the Canadian way on leading the global conversation around climate change.
Perfect. Thank you, Premier Moe. Let me begin with pointing out comments that came from a sitting cabinet minister. Minister of Rural Economic of Canada, Goldie Hutchings. She suggests that a discussion that we'll have down the road when we know that this one is working. But I can tell you Atlantic Caucus was vocal with what they've heard from their constituents, and perhaps they need to elect more Liberals in the prairie so that we can have the conversation as well. She directly linked the prospect of carbon tax carve-outs to voting Liberal. How, Premier Moe, has this changed your relationship with Ottawa, and has it given you and your prairie colleagues confidence that Ottawa is acting in good faith when it comes to the carbon tax?
In about 10 seconds, Mr. Moe, or Premier Moe, sorry.
Well, I don't think there are going to be very many more Liberals elected in Saskatchewan anytime soon. The fact of the matter is this is disappointing, but it does stack on a number of disappointing items. Listen, our relationship with the federal government is issues-based and policy-based. We don't agree with this policy, and we don't agree with those statements.
Thank you, Premier Moe. Thank you, Mrs. Cramp-Newman. Mr. Durin, welcome back to Ogo after a lengthy absence.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Premier Moe, as my father always taught me, when you point the finger, there's always three fingers pointing right back at you. And I know that you haven't reduced your provincial sales tax or removed the provincial sales tax on heating, but I don't want to get into that, but I know for a fact that hasn't been done. I know that you haven't reduced income taxes. I've looked at year 2023 and year 2024, it's the same. And I know that it's important to talk affordability, but we have to, if you're going to point the finger at us, I think it's important to recognize that you also need to do something. Now, yesterday, the Prime Minister asked you to come up with a credible plan that will respect our Paris Accord. And you've said something today, which I'm shocked, to be frank. You're against the clean fuel regulations. Do you have canola farmers in Saskatchewan?
Yeah, certainly. We have, we'd likely be one of the largest canola producing jurisdictions in the world, and are advancing that into ultimately climbing that value chain with canola oil. And significant investment, I would say, in canola oil manufacturing. The conversation around the carbon tax has been part of that investment challenge, I would say, but we are finding our ways through that.
Are you aware as to why they've made those such investments into Saskatchewan? And do you know why the Canola Growth Council, the Canola Council of Canada, Canola Growers of Canada were all supportive of the clean fuel standards? Do you understand that? Do you know why?
Because potentially they would use some of that oil to reduce the emissions in the gasoline that we are burning or utilizing, that families are burning across Canada. And there is some of that conversation that is happening. However, I think there is a much more collaborative path forward on what will actually be achievable in this space. This is going to cause the cost of gasoline to go up for families. We are in the process as well at looking at, should we be a feedstock of transitioning really a food product to a fuel product for places that are already have the clean fuel standard in place, like California, for example. And so that is an ongoing conversation, not in all states throughout the U.S., but an ongoing conversation in Canada as well.
But in order to develop the local market, that clean fuel standard is the regulation that allows canola farmers to sell more products for fuels. That's an important policy. That's why they've been so supportive of this particular policy. Now, I want to go on to, you said you've participated to COP28. I'm assuming that you're in favor of international trade.
Yeah, absolutely. We trade with over 150 countries each and every year, export to them, provide them with food security and fuel security.
And I'm assuming that you're also aware that many countries across the world, whether it's Europe, the UK hasn't made this recent announcement. You know what a carbon import tariff is?
I am aware of what a carbon import tariff is.
So do you know what the impact, if Canada does not have a price on pollution, how devastating that would be for our farmers in Canada, in Saskatchewan?
I know that we have a federal government that should be engaging proudly on behalf of the industries that are employing not only Saskatchewan residents, which I would remind everyone are Canadians as well, but all Canadians with respect to what we are doing in our industries today. As I said, the Saskatchewan story is not only in Saskatchewan. Every province has a story about what they are doing, how they are reducing their emissions in the industries that are employing people, creating wealth. And I would ask respectfully our federal government and all of those involved to take that story abroad. That's what we did at COP28, and that's what we continue to do through our 10 trade offices, provincial trade offices that we have that work alongside our High Commission offices and our ambassador offices around the world, including one in London and one in Germany representing the European Union.
No, and I certainly support the work that Saskatchewan farmers are doing. I've been to their farms. They are innovators. The University of Saskatchewan is doing some great work in terms of being able to measure that particular output. But I'm afraid that if we don't put a price on pollution, then we are not going to be competitive in our exports market, because eventually what's going to happen is that jurisdictions that do not have a price on pollution will be slapped with an import tariff. I don't see how that could be advantageous to our Canadian farmers.
Yeah, I rival that concern with the federal government making these policy decisions that are going to put our national and I would say our continental food and fuel security at risk. And that is exactly what we saw happen.
And that's why I'm pleading with you to come up with a regional plan that makes sense for Saskatchewan. Absolutely. If you want to exempt farmers, that's up to you. But a regional approach is much better than a federal approach. The Prime Minister asked you to come up with a plan, so I'm pleading with you, come up with a plan that makes sense for Saskatchewan farmers. Thank you.
We did.
Thanks. That is just past our time. Mrs. Vignola, go ahead for 2.5 minutes, please.
Merci beaucoup, monsieur.
Well, thank you very much again, Mr. Chairperson. Now, earlier you said that the carbon exchange was perhaps not an effective initiative for Saskatchewan. It's just been great for Quebec for the past 25, 30 years. I could tell you about childcare, the anti-scab legislation and other whole host of things. But that said, do you feel that Toronto's trade exchange is bad for Saskatchewan, the New York one, the Toronto one, and I'm trying to establish a link here with the carbon market. In a sense, it works in the same way, and it would make Saskatchewan bring in substantial amounts of money for both Saskatchewan and the federal government without hurting the rest of the economy, as you alluded to in your opening remarks. Are you against stock exchanges? Because stock exchanges do apply to Saskatchewan. Is it only the carbon exchange that you have a problem with and not stock exchanges per se?
No, and we have many companies here that not only I would say trade and are traded on Toronto Stock Exchange, New York Stock Exchange. We have commodities in Chicago, but also globally. Many countries that are investing in Saskatchewan are on global stock exchanges as well, and that is a way for them to access capital, and we all know precisely what stock exchanges do. When it comes to the heavy emitter carbon space, we have a provincial plan in place for that. In fact, in many ways, worked with Alberta and led the nation alongside Alberta with the formation of a technology fund and working with our industries on what's achievable, when it's achievable, and ensuring that they are making the adequate investments to achieve lower emissions over time, ensuring that we are not putting forward unachievable targets.
Merci.
Thank you, Premier. My final question. You don't want a carbon exchange. You don't want a carbon tax. You're making investments to improve technology. But what solutions? We're trying to come up with solutions here. What solutions have you come up with that will enable Saskatchewan to reach its overall emissions targets when it comes to actually cutting back on greenhouse gas emissions?
I apologize. We're past our time. If you're able to offer up a brief response.
Significant solutions in the nuclear space when it comes to our electricity grid, significant solutions in trading through commerce, innovation in our ag industry, which I said is the most sustainable in the world. Same goes for oil, same goes for potash, and the opportunities through internationally traded mitigation outcomes to capitalize on trading carbon credits back and forth globally through that system. And so we have the Provincial Tech Fund. We have a fund set up that our industries can access to invest in reducing their carbon footprint, but I would say that they are doing so anyways on their own, and we continue to set targets with them through our our output-based emitter program provincially put forward that we have here, and they're doing a very good job when we compare them to their global competitors.
Thank you very much. Mr. Boulris, please, for 2.5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. Premier, you've used arguments that we've heard bandied around in the past, i.e. that when we reduce pollution by unit of production, well, then we compare well with other countries such as Russia and Venezuela. But that's a red herring most of the time, because if we reduce pollution in that way by, say, 15%, and yet there's an increase of over 50% in overall pollution, well, the upshot of that is greenhouse gas emissions are up. And that is contributing to climate change, forest fires that are threatening your own communities. So reducing the density of pollution by unit of pollution doesn't really mean that much. Now, you said that the price on carbon is being borne by consumers and individuals. But what solution would you come up with when it comes to pricing carbon for companies and corporations?
We have that solution in place with our output-based heavy emitter fund. They pay into a tech fund and they're able to access those dollars for investments in innovation. And like I said, they're going far above accessing just that fund for investments in innovation. They're making their own. I haven't put forward any arguments. I've put forward facts. When it comes to buying something globally, you'll have an ingredients list on the side of your box, and you'll have a price tag on it. I would say put a carbon content piece on that box as well. When you are purchasing oil that might be made in Saskatchewan and on your fuel pump, you should know that since 2015, we've reduced the emissions 65%. That's very real. If the rest of the world did that, global emissions down 25% overnight. If you're producing a granola bar or a wheat product or a canola oil product, 64% lower carbon in a Saskatchewan-based product, Saskatchewan-produced product versus somewhere else in the world. By buying that product, you are making the sustainable decision of buying a lower carbon product. The same is true when you buy potash fertilizer made in Saskatchewan. Not only would I say that it is very arguably more ethical than other places in the world, but it's had half the carbon content per ton. And you are doing right by providing that fertilizer for your farmers. You're doing right because it's cost competitive. It's it's a high grade quality, but it's the most sustainable product that you can buy in the world. And if you truly do care about the environment, you should buy your products from Saskatchewan, and I would say equally, you should buy them from Canada as well, because we are doing the right thing, whether it be in industries, whether it be in families, whether it be in communities. We are making every effort to reduce our footprints, and we're doing it and can do it without a federally imposed carbon tax, I would put forward.
Thank you, Premier Moe. Mr. Barlow, and then Ms. Atwin to finish. Mr. Barlow?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Premier, for being here. First, I want to, say congratulations on the economic output of your agriculture sector in Saskatchewan. I see it exceeded $2 billion in exports again last year. And I just want to put the numbers are quite staggering, as you talked about, in terms of the production from Saskatchewan and the impact it has not only on Saskatchewan economy, but Canada. When Saskatchewan exported 91% of Canada's chickpeas, 88% lentils, 80% of Canada's durum wheat, 67% of Canada's dry peas, and more than 50% of Canadian production of canola, barley, oats, and canola oil comes from Saskatchewan. When you see that kind of output, what impact does Saskatchewan's agriculture sector have not only on Saskatchewan's economy, but Canada's economy?
I just say you said $2 billion in exports. It's $20 billion in ag exports, $50 billion in total exports from Saskatchewan. And to Mr. Bullereese's question earlier, that makes us the highest per capita exporter in the nation. And we are exporting the most sustainable products that you can find on earth. And so the carbon tax does have an impact on each of these industries, a very real impact. And I'd say an impact on the families and people that work in these very industries, as well, as we've discussed over the last period of time. But I would say that there's a larger problem looming when it comes to the investment attraction in order for us, and our goal is to continue to expand these industries out, to produce more of the sustainable goods that we produce make those available to the world. We need to attract investment to do that. When you look, for example, at primary agriculture production, and you listed what we produce there, and it's the spinal cord of the Saskatchewan economy. Every community in this province is dependent on it in some way, directly or indirectly. When you look at the fertilizer cap that was being bantered about a while ago, that would reduce our production in this province by 20 to 30%. Why would we reduce production when in a world that needs food security and requires food security and is looking for food security? Why would we reduce the production of the most sustainable food that you can find on earth and not look for ways to enhance that production and make it more available to Canadians, displacing some of the other food that's produced in other areas. Or better yet, take some of the innovation that we have in Saskatchewan, sell it through commerce, utilize our internationally trade mitigation outputs to capture those carbon credits back to Canada, Saskatchewan, and the ag industry so that they can reinvest in even more innovative opportunities to make sure that not only are we doing better when it comes to reducing our carbon footprint in food production, but we're sharing that technology, we're sharing that innovation with the world. We're doing this in India right now. The second last time I was in India, and our exports to India are up in the last while. Second last time in India, I stood on an air drill built in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, in a farmer's field just outside of Chandahar. They had sold 1,000 of those air drills. The latest technology in zero-till air drill technology that you can find on Earth is now being transferred through commerce to India. That's a good thing for the environment, and it's a good thing for the sustainability and food production in India.
Thanks, Premier. And I find this discussion we're having quite incredible when you talk about the environmental sustainability and successes that Saskatchewan farmers have put on, and yet you continue to be punished with carbon taxes and higher carbon taxes rather than being applauded for some of the accomplishments in innovation and precision agriculture in Saskatchewan. We know the numbers. Saskatchewan farmers paid $12 million last year in direct carbon taxes alone. When that carbon tax was up 23% on Monday, Saskatchewan farmers will be paying $15 million in direct carbon taxes to heat and cool their barns, dry their grain. That doesn't include the carbon tax they'll be paying on transportation, another $36 million just on the carbon tax from transporting commodities through rail. Premier, what is the economic impact on the sustainability of your farm families in Saskatchewan if they are continuing to absorb these higher carbon taxes?
Well, it will come home to roost in years where margins are thin. And we had certain areas of the province, as was noted earlier, that did experience drought, not just this year, but last year. We had some areas of the province that had record production. And so I would just say the successes that we're having we feel somewhat unrecognized. And I would say the industry feels they're unrecognized. And so we would ask all federal MPs, our federal government members on all sides to recognize what we're doing, not only in Saskatchewan agriculture and Saskatchewan industries, but recognize what Canadians collaboratively are doing in the various industries across. This cost is not helping. It isn't driving innovation. It most certainly isn't driving the investment environment that we need to ultimately drive that innovation that is going to make our industries more productive. In fact, the Bank of Canada has said just this past week that actually we have a productivity crisis. And I would say that we need to have another look. A very high-level look at how are we going to create that investment environment, because with that investment comes innovation. With that innovation comes industries with Canadians working in them all across this nation, whether it's manufacturing in Ontario or Quebec or natural resource production in the prairie provinces and into British Columbia as well, or all of the good things that happen in Atlantic Canada. We need to attract that investment, drive that innovation, and then look at how we can share that innovation with the world through commerce, yes. And that is ultimately the recipe for success for the manufacturing industry in Ontario and Quebec, is they are selling their vehicles, not only to Canadians, but to other people around the world. And there's some of the latest technology available.
Thanks, Premier Moe. We're now Ms. Hatwin, please, for 5.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Premier Moe, for being with us today. I'm just going to begin by quoting the Supreme Court of Canada in their ruling around carbon pricing. Climate change is a threat of the highest order to the country, and indeed the world. The undisputed existence of a threat to the future of humanity cannot be ignored. A provincial failure to act directly threatens Canada as a whole. So, Premier Moe, you mentioned that you do believe we need to lower our carbon emissions. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
And you took part in COP discussions. So do you support the work of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change?
We supported the work that was done with respect to tripling the nuclear footprint, Canada signing on to that agreement. We think that will go a long ways in reducing global emissions. We did not support the methane 75 announcement that came out at COP28 by our federal Minister of Environment. And those are about the only two discussions that we had alongside.
Is that why you sent a delegation of 60 members?
No, what we did was go to unfortunately tell the story that Canada didn't, and that was exactly what we're doing and how we're producing the products in Saskatchewan. I mentioned potash. I mentioned
Okay, thank you. I'm
the
just
ag
going to focus
products.
it back on Canada. Sorry to interrupt you, sir.
You asked
I'm
why I
looking
went. This is
nationally.
why I went. This is why I went. Is we went
Okay.
to tell the Saskatchewan story. We have a
Oh, sorry,
trade
sir. Yes,
office in
thank
the
you.
Emirates. Yeah,
I need to
yeah, it's
continue.
a
I
good
just have
story.
a
You
short
and I'll
time.
sit down and I'll share it with you one day.
Sure. So do you support Canada's commitment to the Paris Agreement then?
Certainly,
Reducing our emissions.
in particular, Article 6, of which we would like to see some activity in Article 6.
And so again, I'll point to a point that Ms. McNullah made, that just this week, 100 economists signed off in a letter in an attempt to dispel some of the main arguments of Mr. Poilievre and other opponents, including yourself. These economists say that a carbon price is actually the least costly way to lower emissions. So if you agree we need to lower emissions, and we're looking at affordability challenges for Canadians across the country, and this is the least costly way, what would you say to that?
It's not the least costly way in Saskatchewan, and a number of
So you
those
disagree with
economists,
these economists?
a number of those economists are the very same economists that were appointed by your government to the Eco-Fiscal Commission back in 2016, when
So you disagree with the
there was an
economists?
attempt.
Yes or no?
The last agreement that all Canadians,
sorry, I have such a
all
short
Canadian
period of time.
subnational leaders agreed on was in 2016. It was the Vancouver Declaration. That's the
Okay,
last
thank you.
time
I have
Canadian
to ask
agreement we
another
had.
question.
Sure.
So you've also mentioned that you see the carbon levy is showing no measurable impact. So we actually have statistics from the Canadian Climate Institute findings that the carbon pricing system has actually helped lower emissions by about 8% currently, and we're on track to meet our targets. It accounts for about 30% of that emissions reductions plan. And so would you agree with their findings?
I would agree. We could go much further with some collaboration around recognition of the investments in industries from coast to coast to coast in Canada.
I'm also going to focus on the rebate piece because, constituents in my community are certainly concerned about the environment, but they're also, faced with this affordability challenge. And so I'm going to look at some of the folks from your part of the world here. Alan from Saskatoon says the carbon rebate he gets 4 times a year from the federal government is crucial for his household budget. Without the funds, Alan, who is on disability assistance, says he'll have to scale back on spending for his everyday needs. Jermaine from Saskatoon says she relies on the carbon rebate for essentials, and while on disability assistance, the carbon rebate is a key part of her budget. Peter Gilmore, an advocate for the anti-poverty ministry in Regina, says those on low incomes rely on rebates to pay for essentials. Do you know how many people in Saskatchewan rely on these rebates to get by in the midst of an affordability crisis?
In general, they get less back than they pay.
Can you table some data to prove that for us, please,
It's
sir?
in the parliamentary budget officer's report. Been quoted many times, and I can send you that. Yes.
So you don't know how many people in Saskatchewan may be worse off if you cancel the carbon rebate?
Well, I talked to Kevin in Lalash, and he's quite concerned about it because he lives about 4 hours from his major center, a trip that he makes every week or 2 weeks at the least amount of time. I talked to Jamie, also up in the Lalash, Buffalo Narrows area, who is very much was challenged with the electric heat that he has in his home, of which the provincial government has made a move mirroring the federal government's decision on, but also living 3 to 4 hours away from a major center, a trip that he has to make often, both on the business side as well as a personal side with his family, and to get to work.
And I'll just end on the clean fuel regulation. So here in my province, we actually had our premier legislate an additional 8 cents on top of what New Brunswickers are paying at the pump with no justification for it. So would you plan to do a similar thing in Saskatchewan?
I'm not aware of what happened in that case in New Brunswick, so I can't say whether we would do a similar thing. But our overarching goal is to keep taxes as low as possible, in particular taxes that are ineffective, like the carbon tax.
And sir, would you agree that uncertainty around the price on pollution isn't good for businesses?
I would say that the price on pollution is creating uncertainty in the investment environment in Saskatchewan and Canada.
So you don't attribute any of the investments in our renewable energy sector or the new green economy to some of these policies from the federal government?
Listen, the economy that we have in Canada is not new. It may morph and move over time, but it's our Canadian economy. It's not a new economy, and we need to do everything we can to attract investment into it. And the carbon tax policy that was promised to be at cap out at $50, now $170, and who knows where now, combined with a number of other policies, are creating uncertainty for the investment environment. And I would say uncertainty that subnational leaders are trying to navigate through as best they can.
What kind of windfall would the oil and gas industry experience if the carbon levy was canceled?
There'd be no windfall. What you would see is a return to a significant investment into some of the cleanest oil and gas that is produced on Earth. And I think that would be a good thing for the globe.
That is our time. Actually, it's past our time. Thank you very much, Premier Moe.